how's it going? And welcome back to another episode of Mood for Feud. I'm your host Katya, and today we're going to be covering the Lady Gaga and Perez Hilton feud, which in all honesty I kind of forgot about. It seems so wild to me now that Lady Gaga would have ever even been friends with Perez Hilton. So it was pretty interesting to deep dive into all of that, and I hope that you also enjoy listening to the episode. Remember to rate this podcast if you're enjoying it, and you can also follow me on Instagram at Mood for Feud. I love getting messages from you guys and just hearing all of your opinions on the topics that we cover, but it's also a good way to let me know about any future episodes that you'd like me to look into and to send me any feedback as well. So make sure you check that out. Otherwise, I'm going to keep this intro pretty brief, but I hope that you guys have had a beautiful week out there. If you missed me last week, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened, but hopefully I can be a little bit more consistent in putting these out. That's all from me. I'll let you guys get into the episode. Okay, let's get into the drama between Lady Gaga and Perez Hilton. As always, going to do like a little deep dive into Perez and then into Lady Gaga. And then we'll get into the feud. As always, use the timestamps in the show notes if you would like to skip forward. So Perez Hilton was actually born Mario Armando Lavandera Jr. And he was born in Miami, Florida, March 23rd, 1978, and this makes him an Aries. And to be honest, there isn't too much information on the internet about his early life. I couldn't really find any information about his parents or, where he grew up and things like that. So we're just going to skip to 1996, which is when Perez graduates high school. I guess he is still known as Mario at this time. And he receives a scholarship to attend New York University, where he completes a bachelor's degree in fine arts from NYU, and he majors in acting. And after he graduates, he is an aspiring actor. He's going to auditions. I think he gets a couple of super minor roles here and there. But obviously it's not enough to financially sustain him. So he does also work as a media relations assistant for GLAAD. And GLAAD is the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation organization. And then he's also a freelance writer for gay publications and a managing editor for the magazine Instinct. So these odd jobs, working in media relations, working as a writer and editor, I feel like all of this experience kind of sowed the seeds for his upcoming blog. Now, Perez recalls that he initially started blogging as a hobby. It was just something fun for him to do. Obviously, he had the right skills and talent for it. And in 2004, Perez starts a celebrity gossip website from an internet cafe near his home. I believe the reason for this is because he didn't have Wi-Fi at home, and so he would go to this internet cafe, basically set up at the one chair that had a power outlet near it, and then he would just write his blog from there. Now, the blog was initially called Page 666, which is obviously a play on the existing celebrity media site called Page 6, and they do eventually sue him for using that name, Page 666. I found that really interesting because in my mind, Page 6 is such a vague name that Page 666 to me is different enough. This is me with no knowledge on laws and how they work, but I guess it kind of makes sense. I feel like you would probably get sued if you made something called Facebook book. But I don't know. Anyway, so following this lawsuit, he changes the name of his blog to perezhilton.com. And this is where we get the start of his stage name, I guess you could call it, as Perez Hilton. And he says this name was obviously inspired by Paris Hilton. And in a quote to Press Gazette, he says, "The Perez is me, the outsider, the Latino, the gay, and the Hilton is the mainstream, the Hollywood. So it's the outsider's perspective on showbiz and doing things differently than how they were done before." And then in an interview with Cliché magazine, he talks about his blog and he says, quote, "What set my site apart is that prior to perezhilton.com, most blogs were mainly online journals and diaries, but that never interested me. I wanted to talk about celebrities because they're far more entertaining." And we have to remember that this is all in 2004. Obviously, 20 years later, it doesn't seem like such an amazing epiphany to decide to write about celebrities on the internet. But we have to remember that at the time, I feel like most media outlets that were discussing celebrity news and celebrity gossip were all traditionally in print media. They used the internet to drive people to subscribe to their magazines, but all of their actual content at the time was presented in print. And I feel like Perez, amongst some of the other early celebrity gossip sites like Crazy Days and Nights, and even TMZ, he was amongst one of the first to skip the whole magazine thing and just put all the information right then and there on the internet. So PerezHilton.com does start to become very popular, and the news spreads that he's operating out of this internet cafe. And so some of the celebrities that he writes about even use this as an opportunity to like pop into the cafe and feed Perez Hilton stories directly. This was reportedly done by both Amanda Bynes and Lindsay Lohan. And as I mentioned, Perez Hilton becomes the kind of go-to for celebrity gossip because his scoop is so raw, unfiltered, often quite scathing, and he doesn't really shy away from controversial stories. And in the early 2000s is definitely a time where society really didn't hold back when it came to discussing celebrities. There was no consideration for mental health, there was no consideration for drug and substance abuse, no grace given to celebrities, and I would say that the almost general consensus was that it's okay to talk about celebrities in this way because they subscribed to this when they decided to become famous, which obviously now in 2024 we have a way more well-rounded perspective on this. But at the time, yeah, I'd say people had no issues slut shaming, fat shaming, like saying the most disgusting, out-of-pocket things to celebrities, even to teenage celebrities like Lindsay Lohan, Amanda Bynes. It's a bit unimaginable now, but it was just like that at the time. And so especially blog sites like Perez Hilton's, where he wasn't afraid to voice all of those ugly societal opinions that other news outlets wouldn't be able to post and publish. He was able to go on and say, oh, look at what Bloody Blah's wearing. She looks like a slut. She looks so fat. She's gained so much weight. Things like that in this kind of scathing, bitchy tone where people were drawn to that. And I'm definitely not saying that it's okay because of the time period that he was operating in, but I will say he wasn't the only one doing it. And we kind of have to remember that there's a reason that his blog got so popular at the time, and it's because it's what the people wanted. People were craving this kind of news outlet that would just bitch and tear down these celebrities who are famous and rich and had it all. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's important to remember that, I'm not condoning by any means PerezHilton.com, and I don't agree with the way that he became famous basically on the backs of celebrities' misery. But the reason that it worked and the reason that there was a market for it is because everyone else wanted that. Yeah, I do think it's important to acknowledge that. And we also have to remember that at the time, people weren't running around with phones everywhere that have high quality cameras. There was no Dumois where you could submit celebrity spottings or submit your celebrity stories. There's no TikTok. And so what set PerezHilton.com apart is that for the first time, society was able to read stories about their favorite celebrities that weren't just the polished, curated stories that were submitted by a celeb's PR team to a magazine. Do you know what I mean? It was the kind of raw, unfiltered, behind-the-scenes stuff that wouldn't make it into the magazine. So PerezHilton.com is started in 2004, and by 2007, Perez claims that he is garnering 8.8 million page views in 24 hours, which again, for the time period, is pretty incredible. In 2007, 2008, and 2009, Forbes magazine names him the #1 web celeb. And so as a result, Perez Hilton does become somewhat of a celebrity himself. And as he gains popularity and gains fame, he starts to have more access to celebrity spaces. And so we start to see the formation of an interesting tension where he's writing all this gossip about celebrities, but at the same time, he's becoming a celebrity. He gets invited to the parties that they attend. He starts befriending some of the celebrities that he covers on his site. And so it becomes this interesting, tension, I guess, because it's like, as PerezHilton.com, he's made it his duty to post stories about celebrities in a raw, unfiltered way. But at the same time, he's now starting to become friends with them. So how does he manage that kind of tricky relationship? And I guess we'll look into that a little bit more as we get into the feud. Since its peak, there has been a steady decline of PerezHilton.com. Obviously, society has changed. We're quite a different audience today than we would have been in 2004. And the types of his writing style and the kind of really brash, abrasive way of writing about people doesn't really sit right with people these days anymore. And so, to no surprise, he has declined in page views, as well as, his fame and popularity has declined. I'm not even entirely sure if people younger than me would even really know who Perez Hilton is or remember Perez Hilton at all. And I just think people nowadays don't want their celebrity sites to just relentlessly bash celebrities for a profit. It seems kind of tacky, and I feel like people are more craving a nuanced or more wider analysis on celebrity news. Like, how do the things that celebrities do impact society on a wider scale? Things like that. I feel like that's the kind of celebrity news, gossip, rhetoric, discussion that we're craving in today's age. According to the description on the blog, it does still garner over 300 million hits a month though, but I'm not entirely sure how much I believe that. Ooh, I don't know. I just feel like hardly anyone ever talks about this man anymore, and I just don't imagine that 18, 19-year-olds are going on the internet and then logging onto a blog. That seems very 2000s coded to me. Since the height of his career, Perez has had to issue many apologies, obviously because of the things that he writes. And even to this day, he is still continuously apologizing and atoning for some of the ways in which he would just relentlessly bully, I guess you would call it bullying, the way he would relentlessly bully certain celebrities on the internet. He says, quote, "I am definitely aware of my past. I'm not trying to run from it or hide it, but I'm also not going to be defined by it. So while I have definitely reached out to certain people and apologized to certain people, I'm not going to be on a tour of atonement necessarily, because I'd rather focus on the now and the future." And I understand what he's saying there, but I think unfortunately for him, his impact is still lasting. We're still seeing the ramifications of some of those blog posts that he wrote back then, and I feel like people aren't ready to forgive him just yet. And whenever he tries to take a more nuanced perspective on situations, for example when he starts to praise celebrities for talking about mental health and things like that, it kind of just comes across as a bit fake because of the way that he would brutally bully celebrities who had mental health issues. And even though that was 20 years ago now, I think it still leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth when you now see this same person coming up being like, "I'm so proud of XYZ for talking about their mental health struggles," when we know that 20 years ago, if the celebrity had done that, it would have been all over PerezHilton.com and he would have been calling them out for it. Do you know what I mean? In a similar way, he advocates for anti-bullying now, and it just doesn't sit right with the audience, because it's like, why is this massive bully telling me why we shouldn't bully? My personal opinion on why Perez Hilton hasn't been able to be atoned for his past sins, even though other people who were also disgusting and said vile things in the early 2000s have since been forgiven. And I feel like the reason is because he never really took a step away from the internet, away from fame. I feel like if in 2012, 2013, when we started to see the turn of society and the way that we were regarding celebrities, if during that time he'd just gone off the grid, MIA, all the way till now, and then come back as wanting to, I've taken time off, I've thought about what I've done, I've issued a lot of personal apologies to the celebrities that I hurt, and I've worked on bettering myself. And if it was kind of in that way, and then he came back into our lives again and was an advocate for anti-bullying and mental health, etc., that would have been a better way to do it. But because he's just constantly been trying so hard to stay relevant, stay famous, continue to do interviews, continue to maintain PerezHilton.com, that's where I feel like the public thinks he's changed his mind as a way of staying relevant on the internet rather than because he actually believes that his behavior in the past was shitty and wrong. But that's just my opinion. Let me know if number one, any of that actually made sense, and number two, if you agree. I myself personally am not a big fan of Perez Hilton. The thing that I will never really be able to forgive him for is his participation in distributing the leaked nude photos of Vanessa Hudgens. Vanessa Hudgens' nudes got leaked when I was in primary school, I'm pretty sure. I feel like I would have been maybe 10 years old. And so obviously I was a massive High School Musical fan at the time. And to be honest, I still am. But I just remember how scandalous that was for her and how the whole world put the blame on her and made her feel like shit for not being a quote unquote good role model for all the Disney Channel kids. And then she had to issue an apology to her fans because somebody else leaked her nudes and then sites like PerezHilton.com distributed them to make sure that everybody knew about it. I just can't believe we made her apologize for that. That seems so fucking nuts. She sent those to someone in private. You know, she was young at the time. I'm pretty sure she was a teenager. And the way that he just felt comfortable sharing nudes of a teenage girl, I just think even in 2000 and whatever, he should have had the fucking knowledge to know that that's not okay. So yeah, for those reasons, I will never be a Perez Hilton fan, even though I acknowledge that all of that happened a really long time ago. Alright, on to Lady Gaga. So, Lady Gaga was born Stephanie Joanne Angelina Germanotta, and she was born March 28th, 1986, and this also makes her an Aries. Another double Aries episode. My goodness. That's how you know this one's going to be juicy. She was born in Manhattan, New York City, to an upper middle class Catholic family, and her family obviously had Italian ancestry, and she was brought up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So Cynthia Louise, her mom, is a philanthropist and a business executive, and then Joseph Germanotta, her father, was an internet entrepreneur. So I'd say she would have had a pretty comfortable upbringing for sure. At age 4, Lady Gaga started playing the piano. I'm pretty sure it was at the request of her mum. So she starts taking up lessons and starts learning to play music by ear. And she recalls that this is when she really recognized that she is a natural musician and that it was something that she just had a natural affinity for. So she says, dancing and performing and all of that is talents and skills that she's acquired over the years, but that music always came quite naturally to her. Her parents encourage her to enroll in a creative arts camp while she's still in school, and then when she's a teenager she starts doing open mic nights and things like that. At age 17, she actually got an early admission to the music school at New York University Tisch School of the Arts. So she went to the same university as Perez Hilton. And at Tisch, she studies music, but she also refines her songwriting skills as she gets educated in art, religion, politics, and I feel like these things do bleed through in the lyrics that she writes to varying degrees. You can see how she's very much influenced by religion, art, politics, things like that, and the way that they all intersect. And I think her music quite often draws on themes from all of these things. In her second year at NYU, she actually decides to drop out and pursue music full time, and she really gives music her all. She moves out of home. Her parents had set aside some money for her to go to college, and she said she didn't want any of that because she's going to be a musician and really pursue this career, but she didn't really want her parents to feel like they had to fund that because obviously it's a difficult career. You never really know whether you're going to make it or not. She describes in one of the interviews she actually does with Perez Hilton how in her early career she was often really, really broke, and it's because any money that she would make from any performances or little record deals and such, she would just immediately invest back into herself and into her music. So anytime she got a check from a performance, it was going to go back into more set design for upcoming performances or for outfits to wear when she's touring and things like that. I always really admire when people back themselves like this, they're just 100% in, and it's almost like there's no room for failure in that kind of mindset because it's just there's no plan B, there's no other option. It's she's just going to have to become a successful pop star. So at the time, she is working a lot of jobs to obviously substantiate some of her finances. So she works as a bartender, a go-go girl, a waitress, and then also does coat checking. It reminded me a lot of Mariah Carey in her early music career. You know, she was quite the same. She was constantly hustling, working all these side jobs to support her dream of becoming a musician. Now, Lady Gaga also recalls that after dropping out of NYU, you know, she was going out a lot, she was partying a lot, she was doing drugs, meeting other performance artists, and it was in this time that she really starts to find her own style and shape the persona that we now know of as Lady Gaga. And she really went in and honed into her performance art. She really took her time to craft Lady Gaga and become her as well. Now, around this time, she meets a producer, Rob Fusari, and she works with him and also starts dating him at the time. And he's the one who credits himself as being the person who first started calling her Lady Gaga, and he says it was after the Queen song, Radio Gaga. Whilst working with Rob Fusari, she does start writing songs for other artists. So she has writing credits on Quicksand by Britney Spears, Elevator by the Pussycat Dolls, and Full Service by New Kids on the Block. And then in 2008, she moves to LA, and this is where she completes her debut album, The Fame. And around this time is also when she crosses paths with Perez Hilton. So The Fame, her debut album, is released August 19th, 2008, and it obviously does very well and gains her a lot of popularity. But it's actually not until 2009 when Just Dance, one of her singles from the album, becomes very mainstream, and the album just completely takes off after that. And by the end of 2009, The Fame has sold over 8 million copies. And I will say, I remember hearing Just Dance and Paparazzi, the other single from the album, in 2009. That to me is when Lady Gaga went worldwide. So 2009, I think, is when I would say Lady Gaga becomes Lady Gaga that we know today. And she had such a unique presence in the music scene in 2009, particularly because of the way she was so confident in her art and her style, and she wasn't afraid to be her authentic self, you know. And obviously by being herself, I'm talking about being Lady Gaga. And this generated a lot of buzz, to say the least. Some of the most iconic early days Lady Gaga moments that I can recall. Obviously, 2009 VMAs. The same VMAs where the Kanye and Taylor feud began. She performs possibly one of the best stage performance that I've ever seen. I will definitely be posting this to my Instagram. It's her performance of Paparazzi, and everything is just spot on. Like the art, the vocals, the visuals, the drama, the fake blood that starts oozing out of her as she sings in such a eerie way, because Paparazzi is a fun song at its surface, right? Like it's very dancey, it's very techno pop vibes, but the lyrics are pretty creepy if you think about them. And I think she does a really great job in this performance particularly of balancing that pop, fun, light party vibe with the eerie, creepy, stalkery lyrics. It's amazing. One of the best stage performances. Another notable moment is, of course, 2010 VMAs the following year when she turns up in her meat dress. I remember seeing this on the news at the time. People just being like, what the fuck is going on here? And she recalls that it was a political protest she was doing of the Clinton administration Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which basically barred military members from disclosing their sexual orientation. And so she turns up in this meat dress, to make a statement on not just being a piece of meat. And I think this is what I really love about Lady Gaga, because it's not that difficult to do things for shock value. It's not that hard to just be real fucking weird and then know that people are going to talk about that and it's going to give you more press and more fame and popularity. But her performances and her performance art always had so much thought behind them. It was never just a random, I'm just going to dress up in meat for the hell of it. Of course there's a statement behind it, And I think that's what I admire about her the most, is that she really does truly think about everything that she puts out there and that she does. And then the last, probably most memorable moment from her early career, in my opinion, is in 2011 Grammys when she turns up up in the egg. And again, I just remember seeing this all over the news. And so I think people were excited by her. She was always pushing the boundaries and doing something new and unexpected and just totally random. One interesting thing that I found whilst researching her is that she quite often talks about how much of a massive supporter and friend Beyonce is. And I find this interesting because, as you may recall, Beyonce is also a massive supporter and friend of Taylor Swift. And I have to say, Beyonce is a girl's girl, because Taylor and Lady Gaga were artists that both came into the music scene after Beyonce had already made it big. And instead of seeing them as a threat to her career, I think she really just does such a great job of uplifting women and empowering them and welcoming them into the spaces that she initially preoccupied. And I find this so interesting. I'm going to have to do a Destiny's Child episode, because I feel like in Destiny's Child, Beyonce always kind of came across as not a girl's girl. She always was perceived as competing with Michelle and Kelly and wanting to always be the center of attention and the spotlight. But from the other accounts that I've come across whilst researching for this podcast, that's not the vibe I get from her at all. And I just find that so fascinating. Okay, let's get into the feud. Now, to really understand this feud, we have to first cover Perez and Lady Gaga's Bestie Era, because these two were super close friends. So they meet in 2008 when Perez books Lady Gaga to perform at his Las Vegas party. Now, this might seem really random in today's age, but in 2008, when Perez and Lady Gaga meet, Perez Hilton was actually more famous and way more popular than Lady Gaga. And because of his blog site, perezhilton.com, he had a lot of influence and power to manipulate public opinion on certain celebrities. In a later interview, Perez actually claims that Lady Gaga's management sent him one of her demos and kind of, asked him to take a listen, and if he liked it, to maybe write some nice blog posts about her on perezhilton.com. So, like I said, because of all of his influence and in swaying public opinions, a lot of management teams and celebrity PR teams would try to utilize Perez Hilton to their advantage. And so he recalls listening to this demo and he really loved her music and her sound and just her whole vibe, and so he decided to book her for two of his parties, as I mentioned. So one was for his Las Vegas party, which is when they first meet, and then he also booked her for a second event that he hosted called One Night in New York City, and he invited Lady Gaga as the headliner. And so from this, Gaga does start to gain some popularity, and obviously because Perez Hilton is writing about her, his blog site was garnering a lot of views at the time, and so probably a lot of people around that time, their first time hearing about Lady Gaga would have potentially been through perezhilton.com. So Perez and Gaga do spark up a friendship, and they're spotted at several parties together and press events together. And in 2008, Gaga interviews with Advocate, and she says, quote, "I read Perez's site all the time. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as a pop culture journalist. I'm for sure up to date." And so Perez Hilton does use his blog site to kind of write nice articles about her and urge his readers to follow her and support her career. And a lot of articles written in 2008 do credit Perez Hilton in some way or another for catapulting her fame on the internet and persuading his audiences to become Lady Gaga fans. And in 2008, she was almost on the cusp of becoming worldwide famous just 1 year later in 2009. And so as she's kind of this up-and-coming, rising pop star, their friendship takes on a really interesting, mutually beneficial characteristic whereby Perez gets Gaga a lot of hype and clout, and he can manipulate public opinions by posting about her positively all the time. And at the same time, Gaga can start to get Perez access to exclusive parties, events. She can invite Perez backstage at her shows so he can get exclusive content on her. And so we start to see this friendship become quite professionally beneficial. Now, I think this is also a good time to kind of mention the Christina conspiracy. Basically, Lady Gaga and Christina Aguilera were often compared to one another in the music industry. They both released, electro pop music. They had similar visuals with their striking platinum blonde hair, and they were unafraid to do, I guess, what you'd consider out there looks. I mean, whether they'd like to admit it or not, they would have most likely felt threatened by one another because they're almost occupying the same niche of the music industry here. And so at the time, Perez was really using his blog to draw comparisons between the two, obviously with a massive allegiance towards Gaga. He often would put out these articles that would basically refer to Christina Aguilera as like a lesser version of Lady Gaga. He donned the nickname Flocktina onto her, he would often fat shame her, and he would just write a lot of daily snarky articles about Christina. Now, in 2010, when Christina Aguilera releases her album Bionic, it flops really badly. And a lot of people think this has somewhat to do with the way that Perez was just constantly writing these shit articles about Christina, talking about how much of a flop she is and talking about how she's basically just a shit version of Lady Gaga. And so this has kind of led to this conspiracy that Gaga and Perez basically colluded to quite deliberately make sure that Christina Aguilera would never fill that spot that Lady Gaga was garnering for. Now, Gaga has never commented on this, never confirmed or really denied it either, but in 2018, Perez did admit that he unfairly slandered Christina because of his alliance to Lady Gaga, and he does accept responsibility for it. But he does say that whilst Gaga never explicitly told him to write bad stuff about Christina on PerezHilton.com, Lady Gaga would often tell him that she was annoyed by Christina copying her and, coming for her music style and her art style. And so this is what led him to want to defend her. And then he discusses this again in his 2020 memoir titled TMI, My Life in Scandal. He says, quote, "I even went as far as to deliberately hurt Christina Aguilera just a few months after she had been kind enough to perform at my birthday party. Why? Because Gaga and I thought Christina was copying her with the sound of her new album Bionic and the visuals during that era. I started giving Christina all kinds of terrible nicknames on my website. Looking back now, it's one of the things I'm most ashamed of. And I can also see that Gaga was using me as a tool, not only against Christina, but against her other rivals too. She never explicitly asked me to write nasty things about people, but by moaning to me, she made me feel like I, her best friend, should do something about it." And I will say, Perez in this moment kind of gives me the vibes of that one super intense friend that everybody has. Bear in mind, he is an Aries, where you tell them something offhandedly and then they go and start a war over it. And then when you're like, why the fuck did you do that? They're like, I did this for you because you were complaining. So I went and fixed it. So this is definitely the vibe I'm getting there. But you can see why Gaga and Perez were such a powerhouse couple of besties. And I think because of their dynamic and what each of them brought to their friendship, it's almost difficult for them to not accidentally use one another. Like Perez says, he feels like Gaga used him by coaxing him to write these really mean articles about anyone who was competing with her in the music industry and to make sure that she would always come out on top. And then Perez was using Gaga to get exclusive content and access to celebrities that he wouldn't otherwise have without an insider friend. Do you know what I mean? So it's really understandable actually when you look at this first era in the timeline where they're both such good friends and she's an up-and-coming pop star and he's this super influential blog writer. You just know it's not going to work. It's just rooted in fate that they're not going to have a good friendship. Now, they do maintain their friendship all the way till 2011. According to the two, they were absolutely best friends. They would text every day. They would hang out all the time. Perez often referred to Gaga as his wifey. They were very close. And so in 2011, Perez Hilton has a show called All Access where he interviews different celebrities. And so he does an episode of Lady Gaga and it basically involves him hanging out with her backstage to her performances and kind of getting an insight into, Lady Gaga when she's not on stage performing. Basically, I think was the intention behind the interview. So we were meant to see her in more exclusive settings where you wouldn't be able to see her normally, is very like relaxed, laid back, chill, not overproduced. They're not sitting on like a couch a la a talk show with bright lights shining on them and scripted questions. It was meant to be a very like backstage kind of approach. So the interview starts with Perez meeting Lady Gaga in her makeup room before they head to her closet to pick out an outfit. And, we get to see these spaces that you wouldn't normally be able to see. It's very much like behind the curtain kind of vibes. But I will say, even in this early part of the interview, this is before the inciting incident happens, I'm finding it kind of an awkward interview because they both keep alluding to how well they know each other. Like she says, we text all the time, you know me better than anyone. And then Perez also says, like, Gaga and I have known each other for years, like we're so close. And yet some of the questions he asks her or comments he makes, it doesn't seem like they know each other that well. Like, for example, at one point he says to her like, oh my god, it's amazing how far you've come. You used to wear the same thing all the time and now you obviously can't because you're such a pop star. You can never repeat an outfit. And then she's like, actually, I wear the same thing all the time to this day. And I hate the idea that fashion is disposable and that you can only wear something once. Like just little things like that where it's like, if you knew her really well, wouldn't you know that she has this strong aversion to only wearing outfits once? And another time he talks about how they text quite a lot and how she must text a lot of other people as well. And she says no, she doesn't. She like barely texts anyone, and that it's really special the way that she communicates with him. So those are just some things that I found really interesting. So later in the episode, Perez flies to Australia to meet up with Lady Gaga. She is in Sydney doing like a special fan access only performance. So he like rents this house in Sydney and he invites Gaga over to cook a meal together and basically, continue the interview. Again, like it was meant to be very laid back, chill vibes. So Gaga comes with her like bag of groceries and she starts cooking Italian tomato sauce, for a pasta. And, whilst they're cooking, she is being very vulnerable and open. She talks about her body image issues and it does seem like a very raw, unfiltered interview that she's giving. They do crack open a bottle of wine and start drinking that, and then later they do also open a bottle of Jameson. So after the kind of cooking segment, they hop into the bed to chit chat, and it's, they've both got their glasses of wine with them, and I think it's meant to give chill sleepover vibes. Also Perez, because I forgot to mention, during this whole interview, Gaga's like already changed her outfit like 3 times. She had like the one that she arrived in, then she had the outfit that she cooked in, and now she's got the outfit that she's in the bed in. And the whole time Perez is in this, like, I'm not gonna lie, it's a freaking ugly as Peter Alexander onesie. I just feel like everyone needed that visual as I describe this next bit. They hop into the bed and it's really weird because this next segment of like interview questions is over in like 30 seconds. It feels like they just got into the bed, he asked her like 2 questions, and then it cuts and we just get this voiceover of Perez saying, as the wine and conversation flowed, it's not hugely surprising that we forgot all about Gaga's special sauce. Oops. And so like we never revisit the sauce that they started cooking. I don't know, it fell off. You could tell something had been edited out here is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, he does meet up with Gaga the next day. She lets him stay for her dress rehearsal and they have like a mini interview during her break and things seem fine between them. But it is weird the way that the earlier segment of them having their like sleepover chat was just very obviously cut short. But they look fine. Like they're interacting okay, they give each other a hug after the interview and it all seems fine, and that's where the episode ends. But following this interview in 2011, Perez Hilton and Lady Gaga are not spotted again. And remember, before this, they were constantly being paparazzi'd, going to parties together, going to press events together. Perez was constantly writing all this praise about Lady Gaga on his blog post. She was constantly inviting Perez to all of her celebrity parties, things like that. And so it was a bit weird. Out of nowhere, seemingly, the two just completely stopped hanging out. And in 2012, Perez does start to tweet and write articles that Gaga is flopping. And this is obviously a bit of a surprise to his audience because as far as everyone was concerned at the time, that was his hashtag wifey. So why is he now talking all about how bad her music is and how much she's falling off? In 2012, he also gets into a Twitter feud with Lady Gaga's makeup artist, and during this feud, Perez starts to hint with a couple of like cryptic posts that him and Gaga are feuding, and then he says to his followers that the truth will come out soon. Now, in 2013, Gaga releases Art Pop. And again, Perez is commenting, writing a lot of tweets all about how much of a flop Art Pop is and how shit the music is. And then Gaga premieres some of her Art Pop songs at the iTunes Music Festival, which she called her performance at this music festival Swinefest, which was in reference to one of the songs on Art Pop called Swine. And immediately, a lot of little monsters, which is the name for Lady Gaga's fan base, start speculating that the song Swine is about Perez Hilton. And this is because Perez Hilton would often be referred to as a pig in the media, and a lot of people would call him, Pig Rez Hilton and things like that. And so when she makes a song called Swine, and the two haven't been seen hanging out together, and he's talking all about how Art Pop is a flop, people start to think this is about Perez. And then I feel like Perez then also starts to buy into this theory, and he accuses Gaga of being fat phobic and body shaming him and bullying him. And then later Gaga has to clarify, like, Swine is not about Perez. It has nothing to do with you. It's about sexual assault. Which I'm like, imagine being so narcissistic that you listen to this song, which is about a really raw traumatic experience that Gaga went through, and be like, this is about me, she's body shaming me. Anyway, I think Perez still thinks to this day that Swine was about him. Now, this is where the feud probably becomes, for the first time, super notable in the public eye, and it's in August 2013 when Gaga accuses Perez Hilton of stalking her. So what happened was one of Lady Gaga's fans was outside of her building, her apartment building that she lived in, and they saw Perez entering the building with a realtor. And so this fan tweets Lady Gaga and basically says like, oh my god, I've just seen Perez Hilton go into your apartment building. And she immediately responds and is like, do you have any evidence that this is true? Are you telling the truth right now? She even asks her fan to like take photos and send them to her. Like, she wants to know whether this is legit. And so the fan does do that for her. After the fan sends her photos and basically confirms that it's true that Perez Hilton is looking at apartments in her apartment building, Gaga asks Perez to leave her alone. She starts putting him on blast for trying to move into the same apartment building as her. She starts accusing him of stalking her, of trying to scare her, and she asks him to please leave her alone. And that very same day, he allegedly puts an offer on 2 of the apartments that are in that building. Now, Perez denies that he knew Gaga was living in the building. He says that he was looking at hundreds of different apartments that day, and his realtor was the one who suggested the 2 apartments in this building. And because they weren't friends anymore, he basically had zero clue that this is where Lady Gaga was living. And then Lady Gaga tweets, Perez Hilton, you are a liar. I kept every psychotic text you sent to my phone. I never responded, and now you've stalked my home. Boy who cried wolf. And a lot of Lady Gaga's fans do start jumping in on this, accusing Perez of stalking, sending him death threats, which is obviously not okay. And so Perez responds to Lady Gaga's tweet saying, at Lady Gaga, the only boy here is my son, and your fans keep calling him ugly and threatening to kill me. You are making matters worse. Sad. The truth will all eventually come out. It usually does. The real Lady Gaga is very different from the one you pretend to be publicly. And that's the truth on my dead dad's grave. Not only were you #cruel to people who worked for you, friends of mine, but you also purposefully tried to sabotage other artists. Maybe one day I'll talk about the hurt you caused me and many others. I'm still healing, removing your knife from my heart. Lady Gaga responds, I will not handle this privately. The internet is just the surface of what the public sees. I've been quiet for a long time. Not this time. Yeah, so it's definitely getting messy. I feel like these two have been beefing, silently out of the public eye. Gaga references some psychotic texts that Perez has sent her, and I feel like things have turned very ugly between them. But then him viewing apartments in her building is like what broke the camel's back almost, and what prompted her to actually start to air some shit out. whilst it might seem unreasonable for her to accuse him of stalking just because he's looking at apartments that happen to be in the same building as hers, I feel like we're not getting the full story here because we don't know what has been said between them. We don't know the text that Perez has sent to her. Do you know what I mean? There's just a lot of little details that we don't have. Anyway, so following this whole Twitter run and Perez and his son, which is disgusting, receiving death threats, Lady Gaga does issue a tweet that is kind of like a stand down to her fans. You know, she tells them that she doesn't need them to stick up for her in her personal matters and that it's not okay for them to be bashing Perez like this. And I am glad she did that because this is such a common thing where, you know, celebrities are fighting with someone or their fans start to come after this person and then they just go silent. And it's like, you have a platform, you decided to air this drama out on your platform, you need to now tell your fans that they're being fucking unreasonable. So following this whole Twitter war, Perez issues a statement to his blog. It's quite a long one, so settle in. Actually, let me have a sip of my tea first. Okay, he says, I have long had plans to return to New York City more permanently. New York was my home for 6 years in the mid-90s before I moved to Los Angeles. I also lived here for 3 months last year while doing an off-Broadway show. I'm a new father, and I am primarily focused on my family and where we will be most happy. I love New York, and that is where me and my growing family want to call home right now. Sunday, my realtor showed us a list of possible apartments to rent. I learned only after the fact that Lady Gaga lives in one of the buildings we looked at, and she was across the country in Los Angeles when I viewed that building. After a day of innocent house hunting, I am devastated, and my heart hurts that my former very good friend, a person I used to call my wifey and traveled the world with, is making very public and very untrue allegations about me on Twitter. While it is still too painful for me to go into detail about why I chose to no longer make her a part of my life, I will say that I am a critic and not a stalker. Any allegation that I am stalking her based on a day of house hunting with my baby boy and my mother is utterly false, defamatory, and now appears to be putting me and my family in danger. I will continue to be a critic in a way that is not mean or involves name-calling, and I will continue to have an opinion and talk about music and songs like Gaga's Applause. I hope her fans stop sending me death threats, as the suggestion that I pose a danger to Lady Gaga is preposterous. If her fans want to send a message of support to Lady Gaga, they should buy her music. Notwithstanding my feelings about our personal relationship, I do wish Lady Gaga happiness and continued success, and I assure you my family house hunting has nothing to do with her. Interesting. I don't know. Like I said, it's really difficult to tell what is going on in this feud because we don't have the full story. And obviously, I can't trust Perez Hilton, right? And I'm already unbiased towards him. But yeah, I do wonder whether he knew or whether he didn't. I don't know. It's so hard to tell. Obviously, it was no secret she was living there, right? If all of her fans knew that that was her apartment building. 3 months after Perez and Gaga have this whole stalking ordeal on Twitter, Gaga goes on the Howard Stern show, and this is where we start to actually get a little bit more information about what led to their falling out. She explains that her whole feud with Perez is so ridiculous and so silly, and that basically what happened was when he filmed his All Access interview with her, she took 2 days out of her very busy schedule while she was on a literal world tour, like literally in Australia doing a tour. She takes out 2 days of her schedule to interview for him, and that he just starts asking her some really terrible questions and starts being really negative about Born This Way. She says that they'd had a lot to drink and she was feeling really betrayed by him because he was supposed to be her friend, and you know, she was doing him a big favor by making the time to interview with him, and that it felt like he was almost using his friendship with her as leverage to ask her all these terrible questions that he should know would have upset her. And then she says that Perez did apologize, but to her it felt so disingenuous in his opinion because he's Perez Hilton, he's just allowed to treat her in that way. She recalls to Howard Stern the following, quote, "Just because you are who you are does not mean that our friendship doesn't mean anything when the cameras turn on. So now I see who you really are, and I was done after that. And he's just mad that I don't want to hang out with him anymore because I don't want to be around fake people. And I really believed when I'd first met him, I really believed that he wanted to change. And I really believed that he wanted to bully people less on his site and that he wanted to move into a more positive space. And I was really there for him. And I really supported him. And I made sure that, if people didn't want him to come into award shows or things like that, that I would fight for him to get in and get him a pass. She explains, I'm sitting there in this bedroom doing this interview with him, and I'm thinking, my God, you've been with my family. We've eaten together. How can you ask me these? And he was just, framing everything like I was some sort of a failure now. And it really was hurtful. And to be fair, I don't care if anyone thinks I'm a failure. I don't care if anybody even says to me that I'm a failure. But if I took the time out of my schedule to do this interview with you, and you're supposed to be my friend, it really doesn't make any sense to me that you think you're entitled to harass me on film after I've had a whiskey. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. So now we find out that the reason that whole bedroom, sleepover, whatever segment of interviews, why that was so short and why we never returned to the sauce that they were cooking at the time. And it was because, as Gaga mentioned, he started asking her some questions that she wasn't happy with, and he started to just talk about Born This Way in a negative way and talk about her music career in a negative way. And I do get why she would have been hurt by that, because like she mentions, she's really made an effort to support Perez's work and to give him this kind of exclusive interview type thing. And then it would feel like he was kind of just using her to try get some good scoop or some good information for his site. And then she also does speak about the whole stalking incident. She says, and then he tried to move into my apartment next door to me, and I freaked out so much about it because, I have no rights. Just because you're famous doesn't mean you have any special rights. So I went completely crazy on my Twitter. I mean, everybody was trying to grab my computer from me, and I'm just no, because my sister was there, and it made me scared and upset. And then he lied and told everybody that he wasn't stalking me. But that next day, after I asked him to leave me alone, he put an offer in on 2 apartments in the building. Why do you need to live in my apartment? There's only one reason: to try to hurt me or harass me or blow yourself up. If you hate me from over there. Continue firing away on your blog or your Twitter. So again, it's really unclear because we've got her saying that she told him that she's not comfortable with him living there, and then he put the offer in. Whereas from his side, he's saying that he had no idea she even lived there when he put the offer in. So, I don't know. It's all very tricky. I think we won't ever have... Man, where's the realtor? He would know. He would know the timing of this all. Can he pipe up and explain his side of the story? And then I think she says something that rings true right into this day. She says, quote, "We will no longer as a society for much longer sidestep the consequences of the things that we say. It's very important that everybody hears me when I say this. You can think that, it's on the internet, it's no big deal, because it's so easy to type something because you're not looking someone in the eye. But at some point, these things are going to come back to you." And I feel like we are recognizing that in today's day and age, particularly with up-and-coming celebrities or influencers or whatever, and then people do love to go back to find out what they were saying on the internet back in 2005, 2007, when they weren't famous. And she was absolutely right. Some of the things that people write on the internet 10, 15, 20 years ago do truly come back to haunt them. And then she just continues to explain to Howard Stern that it feels like with interviews she's supposed to give people a free pass because there's a camera on to basically ask whatever the hell they want to, and that she's a human being and an artist and a person, and that people just forget that and they just have no shame in asking her the most difficult questions. And another one of the things that Gaga maintains from this interview that she did with Perez is that when she started to become upset at the questions that he was asking and not wanting to answer them and clearly getting visibly upset about it, he refused to turn the cameras off. He told them to keep rolling, and then it was actually her friend who was in the room with them who ended up having to go and pull the cameras out. After this interview with Howard Stern drops, Perez tweets, "At Lady Gaga, and I was the one who pulled away from you after I realized what a real life vampire you are. It's been your MO your whole career." Perez Hilton starts to discuss his side of the story. So obviously Gaga mentions that the reason they started falling out during the interview is because he was being really disrespectful and asking her questions that he knew she wouldn't like. And Perez maintains that this is not at all the case, but that the issue was that Gaga got way too drunk. She got completely obliterated, is how he describes it, and that because of this, she got upset with the questions he was asking, even though they weren't mean-spirited and they weren't offending her in any way. So he says the first question she got upset about is when he asked her whether she felt like the controversies surrounding her song Judas were valid, or, what her opinion was on those, and she didn't want to answer that. And then he describes that following that question, he asked her whether her boyfriend was really supportive of her during that time where a lot of people were accusing her of being too controversial with her song Judas. And then he says she got super upset at the fact that he would even bring up her boyfriend in an interview, and that's basically when the meltdown started. And then later that month, Perez does go on Wendy Williams, and he describes that Gaga recently said that he's a fake friend, but that he is not fake and he keeps it real all the time, and that he is really hurt by her because he viewed her as such a close friend and more than just a friend, and that, at the time in 2011 when they were filming, she was struggling with a lot of issues with drugs and alcohol, and that basically it was this. They had too much alcohol and things like that caused the whole feud, and it wasn't about the questions that he was asking. And then Wendy kind of says to him like, oh, and she says that you refused to turn the cameras off, and he denies that. He says that he did turn the cameras off when she started to get upset. And I will say he at least didn't air any of that disagreement. The least he could do, I feel like, which he did do, was cut out that part of the interview, and that's why the segment feels so short now. At this time, Wendy asks him about the vampire tweet, and he says, quote, she globs onto people, uses them, and once they're no longer of use to her, will throw them aside. And that's what he meant when he called her a vampire. And I can kind of see why Perez, I'm not saying I'm on his side in this feud at all, but I can see why he thinks of her in this way. And it's because in his mind, he's probably thinking, I met her when she was essentially a nobody. He had this massive platform. Her management reached out to him, asked him to promote her. He becomes friends with her before she's even famous and decides to really actively promote her music on his platform. And then when she's super famous and doing this interview with him, she gets upset at him for little questions here and there. I will say one thing about Perez's side of the story that doesn't really make sense is he maintains that she was so upset because he brought up her boyfriend. But on the Howard Stern show, Gaga and Howard speak about her boyfriend for a really long time, and she doesn't seem upset by it at all. And he's asking her some pretty confronting questions about her relationship and, how can someone be with Lady Gaga when she's always on tour and etc. And he asks her some pretty hard-hitting questions about her relationship, and she answers every single one, and she doesn't seem upset or offended by him asking her. But that's basically where the biggest contradiction in the story lies. Was Perez being out of line, or was Gaga too drunk, too sensitive, and had an irrational reaction to some pretty okay questions? Now, since 2013, Gaga hasn't really spoken about her feud with Perez ever since, but Perez does continue to talk about it. I mean, to be fair, he does get asked about it a lot, but he also puts out his own unwarranted videos about it. For example, in 2015, Perez Hilton uploads a YouTube video titled Lady Gaga and Perez Hilton, The Feud is Over, and basically in this video he explains that he wants to put some good energy out there, and that while he was on Celebrity Big Brother, he developed a really keen sense of empathy, and when he got out of the Big Brother house, he felt like it was right to text and email Gaga. He recalls that he sent her, quote, listen, I'm not sending this with any ulterior motives. I don't want, need, or expect you to reply, but I want to get this out to you and get it out of my body and my heart and let you know that any bitterness in my heart that I had from the hurt you caused me, I'm letting go of. And then he acknowledges that he probably also hurt her as well, and he likens their falling out to a divorce where, in the first instance, instance, you're just confused and you just want the other person to feel the same type of hurt that you're going through. But then as time goes on, he genuinely wants to wish her well and the best in life, and that even though they will never be in each other's lives ever again, at least from his side, he's not holding any ill will. And in 2019, Perez is asked about the Gaga feud on the podcast Daddy Issues, and when the interviewers ask him what happened between him and Gaga, he says that, quote, fame happened. And he references Oprah and says fame will just enhance who you are, and that the kind of fame that Lady Gaga was experiencing is no exception. He says, quote, it's not easy for a lot of people to deal with that kind of fame, and it can consume you. It can lead you to drugs, it can lead you to be a bitch, it can lead you to fall out with everybody. She fell out not just with me, but with everybody. And I have to say, I do agree with him, because in 2011, like, Lady Gaga would have been experiencing crazy levels of fame, and it's unreasonable to think that she wouldn't have changed at all during that whole time. Of course, that would have had a massive impact on her life and how she is as a person. I don't know. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that she might have changed because of her fame. Not saying in the way that Perez is describing. You know, their relationship would have evolved, obviously. And in 2020, he gives another interview about this, and he says that she's not the only famous friendship that he's had and struggled with, but he's struggled with his friendships with other artists as well, and it's because of the kind of tensions and where they were both coming from, and obviously him being Perez Hilton, like, it's going to lead to some falling outs. Like, I'm not surprised at all that their friendship didn't last, to be honest, because as I mentioned earlier in the episode, it just seems so unlikely for these two to be able to get along when their motivations are so not in line with one another. But he did say that he feels sincere and that if he could go back in time and do things differently, he would. And then he does also note in this interview that Lady Gaga doesn't work with anyone who she was working with when she was up and coming, and that she's since fallen out with all of them. And like I said, I don't disbelieve him when he says that Lady Gaga changed when she became famous, because I think it would be impossible not to. But I do think that Perez isn't being 100% honest when he says that the questions he asked her that upset her was about her boyfriend or about the controversy that Judas received. Like, I feel like he's either lying about what the questions were or lying about the way that he asked them. So yeah, this is a bit of a tricky feud. Alright, wrapping up my final thoughts on it. Do I believe Perez when he says Gaga changed with fame? Yes, I do. And like I've said, I would find it more unbelievable if she hadn't. But again, like, I feel like we're not getting the full story here, and I don't think we ever will. But I think one of two things could have, or maybe even both things could have happened. Perez could have been asking some out-of-line questions, particularly when they're both drunk, they're not in the right state of mind. But then also, Gaga was just coming into some major fame, and there is a chance that she would have been feeling a bit paranoid, or at the time might have been betrayed by others or sold out to others. You know, when you're that level of fame, you never really know who to trust, because the people around you who you think you trust will sell your story for like some money to TMZ, or will leak photos of you or private conversations with you for money. And so it would, I mean, I don't know how anyone famous isn't just paranoid 24/7, because I feel like I would be. And so there is obviously the chance that she was paranoid and was very hyper aware of people using her or selling out their friendships to make some money. And so maybe when Perez starts to ask those more personal questions, she feels like he's just doing the same. But yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's probably for the better that they had their falling out, to be honest. I feel like it would have gotten to a point where it would have been too difficult for them to manage their relationship, and especially for Lady Gaga to be associated with Perez Hilton, I feel like would have been a backward move for her career, especially when we started to see that big downfall of him as people started to become more averse to the snarky celebrity gossip sites. Interested to hear what you think though. Make sure you rate the podcast if you enjoy it. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Mood for Feud, and otherwise I will talk to you guys next week. Bye!